back, and of course, a lot in the news these days as it relates to, well, global warming, Green New Deal, environmental issues. What an honor for us to have today Mandy, let's see if I get this right, Gunasekara. She's the former chief of staff at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under President Trump and the author of a new book entitled Y'all Fired. Yeah, that's the actual book, A Southern Belle Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. There's a picture of the cover of the book on the screen. Mandy's a veteran environmental attorney and energy strategist and communicator. Currently, she is a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. So what an honor to have her. There's a picture of the book. Mandy, thanks for your time. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and it's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you. What an honor to have you. Wow, you know, you were praised by the president for blowing the lid off environmental scams, and we kind of chuckle on that. But as you look back and you got involved in this, how messy is it really?
It's very messy, and it's unfortunate because what the left has done is that they have purposefully confused the issues around climate change and science affiliated with that to try and scare the American public into accepting leftist policies. And you know, my work on this really goes back to 2015. I was working for the late and former chairman, Senator James Inhofe, at the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and he became infamous, or famous, if you will, because he called out the climate hoax early on, basically saying what it is. It is a scam on the American people. And President Trump has been focused on this. He understands that the left has been using this as their economic policy to the detriment of the broader U.S. economy, U.S. jobs being shipped overseas, and American consumers being burdened with higher cost for no tangible benefit. So all of this, it's very complicated. It doesn't have to be. And President Trump has been really focused, and I've been excited to be a part of really exposing the scam that it is.
What's the biggest part of the scam that got your attention?
It really was the fear. You know, it's using fear to get the American people to agree to policies that make life really expensive. For example, on the energy and the electricity side, the Green New Scam, and the name of it, they've been integrating second-rate technologies like solar panels and windmills into electricity grids, which means in instances where Americans need energy the most, extreme weather events that have always occurred, the lights won't turn on, or they won't have access to affordable fuel at the pump. And the left will tell those people, well, it's okay, you can do without. And the left often does this while flying around to these international climate conferences on their private jets and lecturing the people that they have to accept some scarcity mindset, which the truth is, we are so abundantly blessed, not just with resources, but with the wherewithal of how to use them to the benefit of the greater good.
I guess one of the stunning things that comes to mind over this, Mandy, is how compromised did the science community become in order to give this credibility?
Yeah, it's been a major problem. And, you know, a few weeks ago, Administrator Lee Zeldin, who is the current head of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, he announced he's getting rid of something called the endangerment finding.
Right.
Now, the left and their activist scientists will tell you that this is going to undermine the scientific integrity and create all sorts of future climate catastrophes. That's simply not true. What he's actually rooting out is what you just pointed out, the effects of manipulated science, and the fact that you have to have people in positions of scientific consequence more aligned with activist goals than seeking out the truth and understanding and being willing to come up with a hypothesis, and test it again and again, which is how the scientific process should actually work. But you had politics take over, you had conflicts of interest, all sorts of monetary incentives that really skewed this activist bunch to try and propel climate change to the top of the list so that they could remain important and they could remain funded. And it really was to the detriment of getting to the truth of understanding how our climate works over many, many years and all sorts of different data and details.
How did the science community allow the demonization of CO2?
That's a really good question. I think that there were a small group of people who saw it as an opportunity to be really relevant. They wanted to be the headline makers. And so there's a group of people, and, honestly, this goes back to Al Gore. He was one of the original green profiteers, as I think he was aptly characterized, where he saw an opportunity to use climate change to justify what would be otherwise bad business investments. And he thought, well, if I can scare the American public into accepting these policies, that will shore up these investments that I've made. And he had a whole group of scientists, especially at the United Nations. I've been to some of these climate conferences where they wanted to be very relevant and they wanted to have jurisdictional relevance. It's a bit of a technical term, but it just means that you're important in certain circles, especially in places like Washington, D.C., or these UN conferences. So I really think it was self motivation, and they saw CO2 as an avenue to coalesce behind and really formulate their goal of pushing out propaganda, which would solidify their superiority, if you will, in the scientific space, keep the funding coming, and then shore up these leftist policies that allow them to control the levers of society and the levers of the economy.
So primarily, this is backed by the billionaire globalists.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks like Tom Steyer has been at the heart of this. George Soros. There's a lot of different folks that have been leading the charge at the UN globalist community. Again, a lot of this has to do with they think they can do better than we can. They think that they have some superior knowledge, so much to the point they think that they can control the climate, and they just need to better educate the rest of us. And for any of us who won't fall into line, they will just take away our independence, rights, and liberties in the process. Everything that we've seen actually play out in this country, from what we can drive to whether or not eating meat is accessible, and to whether or not we can rely on the lights actually turning on when we need them most.
Wow. So obviously, this is starting to fall apart. It's starting to be exposed, and you got to be hopeful about this. And obviously, you have the right person in the White House. Here on the West Coast, I mean, literally in our backyard almost, we were looking at these windmills offshore. And we're scratching our heads saying, you got to be kidding. Then I understand just recently the president has now withheld the funding for that. So it looks like the crack is there. Are you hopeful?
I'm very hopeful. And this is something in the policy circles when you've been having practical conversations about the future of the energy grid and environmental impact writ large. We've known that windmills were a bad idea. Actually, one of the last reports that we put out at the tail end of the Trump administration, the first go round, was a life cycle analysis of the devastating impact that these wind turbines can actually have when they're disposed of. And what they ultimately are done is they're just buried. They're buried in a field, they're covered with sand, and then you have fiberglass that is eventually going to turn into really bad polluted sites in the future. So that's just one example of how bad it is. But I'm so hopeful because President Trump, he's been in on this for a long time. I'll go back to my former boss, Senator Inhofe, who was an early on advisor to President Trump back in 2016. And I really think that he has been open and willing to understand all sorts of views and perspectives. But at the end of the day, he hates the fact that the environmental movement has been used to sell out the U.S. economy and ship jobs from Ohio, Pennsylvania, rural places like Mississippi, where I live, overseas for no real benefit.
Okay, I was going to go there. So the jobs leaving, say, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Mississippi, where are they going and what are they doing?
Yeah, so they're repopulating over in places like China because when you have so much regulation and it's expensive to invest and develop here in the United States, businesses are going to that demand isn't going to go away. So businesses are going to move those investments to places where they can build and respond to that demand. And that's largely been China and India. Now, China has signed on to some of these international agreements. And you'll see what the left will often do is say, oh, if we're not in the Paris Climate Accord, for example, or at these UN climate conferences, China is going to take over the leadership role. That couldn't be further from the truth. They're willing to sign a piece of paper that they know makes it harder harder for businesses and jobs to develop in places like the United States and inherit the economic benefits for them while they continue to build out coal plants, massive numbers of new coal plants, which, mind you, don't use basic pollution control equipment that our coal facilities in the United States have been using for decades. So the short-term phrase is you export jobs, you import emissions, and that has actually been the effects of stringent, unbalanced environmental policy here in the United States.
Wow. So it's a battle between science, business, and ultimate control, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for the Democrat administrations, a disregard for the law. We have some of the best environmental laws in the world. We have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. We have statutes focused on addressing legacy pollution. The problem is you have in Democrat administrations alongside unelected bureaucrats that will push beyond the bounds of the law and shift the focus of agencies like EPA from protecting public health and the environment here in the United States to instituting a leftist, globalist environmental agenda. And that is to the detriment of what you just pointed out, businesses. It's to the detriment of actual scientific pursuit and a curiosity in the way things actually truthfully work. It's to the detriment of all of that. And that's what President Trump has really been focused on and turning around from day one in this administration with great help from leaders at the EPA, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Interior.
So what's so interesting to me, Mandy, is that, we have the Clean Air, the Clean Water Act, and these things, and they've actually worked. I mean, I'm a pilot. I used to fly over L.A. in the middle of the afternoon on a beautiful day and have to file an IFR flight plan because of the pollution. Today, you can fly over that basin and see everything. So we've made great strides, but yet all the emphasis is on America needs to pay for the bill for the world, and yet we've made the greatest strides forward. How do they justify this?
Well, it's totally backwards. And it's because you had in previous administrations apologists who would apologize for America's industrial success, as well as in environmental improvements. To your point, Paul, flying around, the LA basin, we have actually the cleanest air on record right now. Air pollutants, and the EPA measures this by tracking 6 major traditional pollutants, everything from particulate matter to nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and on. They have been reduced by 80% since the 1970s when these programs started. So we actually have an amazing environmental record, but you don't hear about that because you have had previous administrations put environmentalists in positions of consequence when they're going to these international negotiations and basically apologizing for industrial success. When what we should be doing, and this is the path President Trump is following, is sharing these new innovations, whether it's in energy extraction, whether it's in pollution control equipment, or how to make any widget more efficiently, like we do here in the United States, because the market produces and incentivizes those sorts of efficiencies. So really, the shift should be on technological sharing and innovation.
Over the years, over the last 10 years, I've had a lot of legislators on the program that we've talked to, and some of them said we have 48 years left or we're beyond the point of no return. Well, we are 10 years later, we got cleaner water and cleaner air. Now, I laugh. I'm just wondering, how can they continue to show their face and blow the horn of fear?
Well, it's interesting. President Trump in 2018, he made a really famous speech. This is when he went to Germany, and he was warning them of their over-reliance on Russia for natural gas in particular, but vital energy resources. And what he said, and he characterized it so well, he called these folks the perennial prophets of doom. They're the people, the naysayers of years past that are making the same little chicken little arguments, but basically proposing the same solution. These bad things are going to happen, but I alone can fix them. You just need to hand your rights and liberties over to me so I can make these decisions for you. So it really is just there's a group, there's a vein of folks in society. They will always be there trying to push such a negative outlook, and they have a scarcity mindset, what we should have is an abundance mindset, something that is being embraced across the board in this administration today.
Oh, wonderful. Let me take a quick break. Mandy Gunasekara, am I saying that right?
You are, yes.
Okay. Check out her book, Y'all Fired. I love the title. Y'all Fired, A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. There's a picture of the cover of the book on the screen. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. What a joy, quite frankly, an honor to have with us today Mandy Gunasekara. She is the former chief of staff there at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under President Trump, author of a fascinating book. It's called Y'all Fired, A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. She's a veteran environmental attorney, energy and strategist, communicator, and she's a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. There's the picture of the cover of the book on the screen. Check it out. What an honor to have her today. Mandy, you know, as the swamp's slowly being drained under this administration and fake science being exposed, how has the deep state pushback been since President Trump started all this?
There's really two categories. There are the folks who are in code red alert, and they're doing all that they can to continue to try to undermine President Trump and his policies from getting across the finish line. But they are an increasingly smaller bunch. The second group, and this is from friends of mine that went back in the administration, they're currently serving today in really big, important roles. But what they have said is that the integration of some of these policies that have brought back accountability into the deep state and throughout the federal bureaucracies, that the folks are actually doing their job, which is to be a civil servant and to follow the political direction coming from the decider in chief, the president of the United States, and the folks he delegates on down, including the administrator over at EPA and then the various secretaries. So it's interesting. The deep state, you've seen a lot of the early on when the Department of Government Efficiency was first exposing the extent of waste, fraud, and abuse, not just at USAID, but even places like EPA, the deep state. You know, you're seeing them come out, these frankly, they were kind of sad protests, but that was a picture of who you're ultimately dealing with. A lot of that has gone away. I think a lot of it has gone away because the funding at USAID turns out was going to some of these nonprofits that were just about creating professional activists and not actually implementing tangible policies or services tied to whatever agency submitted those federal grants or whatnot. But nonetheless, yeah, the deep state, they're trying to pull out all the stops, but they're not only up against a formidable foe and President Trump, who has clarity about the way the deep state works. There's a lot of us who worked for many years, the 4 years during the Biden administration, trying to figure out, okay, on day one, we know how the deep state operates. We need to make sure that we hold them to account and try to shrink the size and scope and reach of those bad actors. And so there have been policies implemented from day one. We knew litigation would come, but a lot of recent Supreme Court wins have really defined the landscape and propped President Trump up for continued success on holding the deep state accountable and shrinking the size and scope of the federal government in really responsible ways.
So how bad is the waste and fraud in the EPA, and did it eventually go to NGOs?
Yeah, it was really bad. It got really bad during the Biden administration. You may recall it was a Project Veritas video that came out. I think it was December, but it was right before President Trump and his team came in. And it was a conversation with somebody who was working in the EPA's grants office or had oversight of EPA grants. And he was talking about this $20 billion slush fund that had been created outside of EPA as a direct means to avoid basic federal oversight and distribution of those funds. And he hearkened it to throwing gold bars off the Titanic. Now, Lee Zeldin and his team came on day one and wanted to claw back those funds. Because just to put that in perspective, $20 billion is almost double EPA's entire operating budget. And so you had this office, it was called Environmental Justice Office, and that was strategic as well. It was a superfluous office, but it was basically set up as a taxpayer money laundering scheme to take taxpayer dollars given to EPA by virtue of some of President Biden's bills, money that was funneled there, and then the EPA, under the guise of environmental justice, which is supposed to be about helping low-income minority communities address legacy environmental issues, that money would actually just go to nonprofits that were more focused on achieving political goals than they were about helping any type of disadvantaged community.
Amazing. It just rocks your brain. It puts you on tilt. I mean, will this ever be exposed and dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, this was the great thing about the Department of Government Efficiency, I would say, their early work. And this is something we struggled with in the first administration, was we knew that someone needed to audit the expenditures of the federal government. Now, I've been in a position when I was serving as chief of staff where I was looking at some of these budgets, and it was just purposefully convoluted and complex, and you never really knew what dollar went where. And so the Department of Government Efficiency coming in and doing an audit to get a clear picture of the extent of the waste, fraud, and abuse, where money was going, and then whether or not those funds were actually going to fund something consistent with its legally mandated mission. It was so wonderful because you had Elon Musk and his team of folks come in, do the audit, but then importantly, communicate the results of that audit to the public in ways we could all understand. Whether Democrat, Republican, whatever, you knew that $20 billion going to a political nonprofit under the guise of helping communities or people in actual need, there's something fundamentally wrong with it. And when you find out it's your taxpayer dollars that are doing something like this, it's infuriating. So I think it's been exposed. It's important for the general public to continue to pay attention and to hold their representatives for elected government to account, and to not let this just fizzle by the wayside. There's a lot of headlines, a lot of things going on. But at the end of the day, responsible use of really valuable taxpayer resources, that is so important for the functioning of our government, but then also for the continued success of we, the taxpayers, having faith in the decisions of the federal government to the benefit of the greater good as defined by Congress.
Wow. So as we continue down the road of dismantling this climate scam, you got about a 3.5-year window here. What's your projection?
Well, I think the step one, Administrator Zeldin has initiated the rescission or dismantling of the endangerment finding. Right. That is step one. As he did this, it's particular to regulations for vehicles, so cars and trucks, as well as 18-wheelers, heavy-duty vehicles on the road. That really is step one. The rest is then going through and fixing the overregulation of the energy industry, fixing the overregulation of the oil and gas industry. And so in the immediate term, you're going to see downward pressure on the costs of electricity and what you pay at the pump, as well as increased reliability as grids become more resilient and can use traditional energy resources. But 3.5 years, it's not enough time. Honestly, and this is one of the great things about the America First movement, we have such a deep bench of really experienced, charismatic leaders that hopefully can continue this good work for a number of years so they can be solidified. Perhaps we can get a few more bills passed in Congress, because that ensures longevity, which is really important for these benefits to be felt far and wide.
All right, about 30 seconds. What do you want people to take from Y'all Fired?
Well, it's a book. It's my experience. It shows some of the crazy anecdotal experiences I had at EPA, the way the deep state will not just stop the president's policies if they disagree, but try to demean, demoralize, and discredit the appointees. But then the most important thing is, how do we solve it? The good news is DOGE is on top of it, but there's a lot more to be done, and so I encourage folks to check it out if they're interested.
All right, it's called Y'all Fired, a Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp. There's a picture of the cover of the book on the screen. Mandy, you're a delight. Thank you. Can we get you back sometime?
Certainly, anytime. It's been wonderful to be with you.
All right, thank you. God bless you. Have a great day.
You too.